Welcome to the Typical Skeptic Podcast, where we dive deep, you decide. Questioning the matrix, from UFOs, where the shadows unknown reside. Rob Khalil busting myths like ghosts in the night. Paranormal pros, secret space ops, yo, we keep it real, no fright. Typical skeptical seeking, never sleeping on the lies. Aliens, Anunnaki, black ops in disguise. From abductions to ancient scripts, we flip the script wide. TSP style, mile after mile, truth can't hide. Hold up, TSP crew assemble, we dismantle the fable. My lab's targeted souls, breaking out of the stable. Dogman howling, Bigfoot prowling, cryptids in the mist. Mandela the fifth, twisting reality, can't resist the twist. Soul trap snapping, reincarnation mapping, holographic dreams. Near-death visions, out-of-body missions, waking up the teams. No censorship here, we fear no elite scheme. Conspiracy kings ringing bells, hear the freedom ring. Skeptic truth seeking, never sleeping on the lies. Extraterrestrial.
Welcome to Typical Skeptic Podcast. Be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Typical Skeptic Podcast. I can't believe we're up to episode 2760. And then my guest today, he's been on my show actually 2 or 3 times before, but like it was on my old channel, and I forgot to tell Freddy that, but like my old channel got taken down and we're rebuilding a new one, but we've already been able to rebuild pretty good so far. But my guest is best-selling author, researcher, and filmmaker Freddy Silva. He returns to Typical Skeptic for a deep investigation into his newest documentary, Megalith. More than 100,000 megaliths once covered in the French region of Brittany, creating what Freddy describes as the world's largest megalithic metropolis. Similar monuments across Portugal, Scotland, and southern England. But why were these locations selected? And how are these stones reaching 60 feet tall, transported as far as 40 miles? Freddy's investigation uncovers remarkable connections involving identical megalithic designs and construction methods, selective stones transported across enormous distances, gravity anomalies and geological fault lines, electromagnetic energy surrounding sacred sites, altered states of consciousness, ancient legends of gods arriving from the sea, migrations originating from the Black Sea, a mysterious linguistic connection to Armenia, and the possible identity of the original master builders. Were these monuments primitive ceremonial structures or pieces of advanced technology designed to interact with Earth and influence human consciousness? Freddy also connected discoveries of the megalith with his previous research into the Shining Ones, ancient giants, the Apkallu sages, and the lords of Anu, pre-flood civilizations, and the survivors who helped rebuild humanity following a global catastrophe approximately 12,000 years ago. And it's going to be an amazing conversation, and I'm bringing him to the stage now. And Freddy, thanks so much for coming back on. How are you?
Hello, Rob. Hey, like the new music.
Thanks. Yeah. I kind of rebranded I got my first YouTube channel taken down. I put I got up to 20,000 followers on that channel, and then it got taken down. Then I started a new channel. I have 8,000 on this one, but I started on Rumble too. So I have like 6,000 on Rumble too. And then on the audio podcast. So I kind of spread myself out all over the place when I got taken down, you know?
Oh, good for you.
yeah. But how are you? It seems like you're really connecting the dots on ancient history and putting some things together.
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing this for 30 years, and I've been talking to large upright rocks for a long portion of that time, trying to work out what our ancestors were up to when they were moving these enormous rocks across the landscape, and why they putting them where they were, for what purpose. And it's taken that long to sort of collect data, experiences, and now scientists coming in. And there seems a bigger picture is now coming together, because if we take a look at the 3 biggest concentrations of megaliths in the planet, which is the Karnak region in Brittany, central Portugal, and also, incredibly, as it might seem, northern Scotland, the islands around the northern coast of Scotland. They have a huge disproportion of megalithic sites. I mean, Orkney alone has 3,000 on this tiny little archipelago. And it makes you wonder why. Why were these places chosen? What was the underlying mechanism? Is there something in common? And now we are beginning to realize there are commonalities and points in common. They seem to have been utilizing the Earth's geology and its systems of energy. So we're finally beginning to realize why people are experiencing unusual sensations around them. There are folklore associating with altered states, initiation, but also with fairy folk and elf folk, and of course, shining people. So it's all coming together nicely. It's been a patient exercise. So I'm glad it's finally sort of coming together.
Yeah, let's start off with this. Like the people who made the megaliths, or who we think might have made the megaliths. Do you believe it traces back to the shining ones?
Oh, absolutely. Because the progenitors of all the European megaliths, if you follow the DNA and the migration trail, it starts around the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. So it'll be Siberia, Ukraine today. And they moved around 6,000 BC because of, wait for it, climate change. So nothing new there. And they lent the names to most of the stone circles, the standing stones of Europe, because the underlying language is Armenian. And now that we understand that, we can make a connection. And if you keep bringing that story back all the way down to what is today Armenia, or what's left of it, it used to be the northern border of Egypt at one point. And that's how big that country was. Today it's shrunk down to, an area the size of Massachusetts. So it's pretty sad. But if you go up into the highlands up there, you'll see the precursors of many of the temples that we find in northern Scotland. For example, Callanish, the precursor of Callanish, is actually in the Armenian highlands, and it's close to 26,000 years old, based on the erosion of the stone and also the alignments that you provide, because the sites are all related to the sky, a certain event, a constellation, a specific star that was prominent in the heaven at the time. And it's called the practice of archaeoastronomy, and this happens all around the planet. And once you understand what they were looking at, which requires the understanding of folklore, you can then start figuring out, using computation, what was the temple aligned to, and that gives you a pretty good date. And around that region, we have stories about the Anu, the people of Anu, also called the Anunnaki. And not the bad people that they're made out to be, by the way. They're much more interesting than all the nonsense that's out there on social media. And these people were associated with astronomy. They were associated with a megalithic building, and their nickname, the Shining Ones and the People of the Serpent, are also found throughout France, Portugal, and Scotland. So you just put one and one together and realize that the migration pattern actually does go in those directions. And what we see today are essentially the extension of their culture.
That's amazing. Yeah. So who were these people? Like, would you? I know when you and I talked before, I listened to one of our last podcasts. Like, it seemed like they were like human, but not really human, and they had shiny skin, and they would put like oil on. They would like anoint oil on their skin. Like, have you come to any conclusion? And I know that you and I have also talked about, from remembering now our past conversations, we talked about that they possibly built like a ladder to heaven or Orion or somewhere. From what I think so, right? Was that it?
Intimately connected with Orion, according to just about every single ancient people on the planet today. Even in Polynesia, they have they call them the Urukeu, which call basically the red people, or the red-haired people, because they had red hair or blonde hair. And the lightness of their skin, the Sumerians called them they were human-like but not quite human. So we were comfortable with them. You're just much taller than us, and I'm 6'5", and I could look up to them because they're about 8.5 feet tall. And we have the skeletons in the giants' graves in France and also in Britain and also in Ireland. That's why they're called giants' graves. And the skeletons, whenever anybody can document them before they disappear, which they do, 8.5 feet tall is about the right height. So we don't know where they came from. In fact, ironically, I'm actually going back through the books of Enoch, which is not his real name, by the way. His real name was Emed Ur Anu. He was actually a scribe, and he was part of the Anunnaki Council. And the other stuff that I'm looking at is the original Sumerian stories of the flood and what happened before the flood, because this is the period we're dealing with, around 9,700 BC. And I'm also struggling with this because there's not much information left over. What we know is that there were a parallel culture that lived here on Earth beside us, but yet separate from us. They didn't want to prejudice the direction in which, well, back then it was Cro-Magnon man. That's the point where humans that we know today as Homo erectus came from. And there's a sort of subtle understanding in the Sumerian books that we as humans today are a kind of hybridization of the Cro-Magnon gene, interspersed with some Anunnaki blood. So this is where, and this is where it gets a little bit confused. They created us in order to take over some of the labor work that they were doing in the middle of the Armenian highlands and all the way into the Middle East. So I guess they didn't like working as much as we do. But then they left it up to us to get on with our own lives and develop in our own manner. The question is, where did they come from? We just don't know. It seems like they were here for already hundreds of thousands of years. The connection with Orion that I hear all the way over to Japan, Polynesia, even in South America, suggests that at one point they came from Orion, whether by spaceship, whether by astral travel. You can basically go on a hypothesis, but from what I hear is that at one time those people moved here to Earth, lived here for a huge amount of time, and by the time that humans are beginning to get their act together as hunter-gatherers, they are going already on a downslope. It's the end of their civilization, and we are now on the upswing. So this is around 8,500 BC when they gave us all the accoutrements of civilization that we have today, for better or for worse. I hate to say that we have done some stupid things with the information that we're given. We're given agriculture, mathematics, understanding of the stars, how to sail across oceans. And as always, it starts off very well, but humans have this wonderful tendency to corrupt everything. So, but we do owe them a modicum of gratitude for leaving us behind the understanding of, how to measure time, how to build megalithic structures, how to move the energy currents of the earth, the mathematics, the hybridization of crops, and also the domestication of cattle. These are all essentials, including writing, for the foundation of civilization. So, but again, I'm still struggling to find more information as to what they were doing here on Earth. Were they here by accident? Was it deliberate? But certainly they didn't want to hang out with us unless they saw things going in a very wrong direction. And then the messengers between them and us, called the Watchers, because they can only watch, they can't interact with us. They would slowly drip feed hunter-gatherers information about how to make your life better. And then they go and disappear into their island homes or their mountain homes. So they live very much aside from the human race. They are a fascinating group. But the more I go around the world listening to indigenous people and how they describe them, and they describe them by different names, which is why it's taken so long to figure out they're the same people. So the Viracochas of South America turn out to be the Anunnaki of the region in the northern Middle East, because they just call them by a completely different name called Wapanti. But unless you know Aymara, you won't know that means the shining people. And that was the nickname of the Anunnaki over in Armenia.
Well, do you think that story from the Bible connects? I know Matthew LaCroix talked about it, where it's like Yahweh's telling the Israelites to go out and like destroy the people of Anak or something, or he sends them out, and you find out that they're going after King Og, and supposedly King Og's a giant. He has like a 13-foot iron bed. Have you heard this? I only know a little bit about it. Do you think there's some truth to that?
Not really, because what's happened is you've got to put this into context of the period where we have the Hebrew or the Hibiru, who were a nomadic tribe that would go from place to place to place, becoming jealous. And this is not a personal opinion. This is an actual observation. Yeah. They were going from the place, getting jealous that people had settled down. For example, the Canaanites had found a place to settle down. The Babylonians had settled down. The Sumerians had settled down. And they borrowed the stories from the Babylonians, which they'd only get through hearsay. So, which is why the Old Testament makes absolutely no sense, because it's all chopped up and clipped up. And a lot of this old information was also said with abstractly in symbol or metaphor in order to prevent people from abusing the stories. So what we get in the Bible is a totally biased Hebrew and Jewish point of view, because they wanted to present themselves with a book that made them, which gave them legitimacy, which they had anyway, because they're alive. If you're alive, you're a legitimate human being. But they felt in order to be superior to the Babylonians that they changed the stories to make everything in the Bible seem like it was adopted from the Hebrew culture, which it wasn't. It's borrowed from the Babylonian culture. But here's a funny thing. Humans being humans, of course, the Babylonians had stolen their information from what their concept of the Bible is from the Sumerians, and changed all the stories, changed all the wonderful gods into barbaric, evil-like people, because the Babylonians were better than everybody else. So you see, it's the pot calling the kettle black. We're just going to rip off somebody else, make ourselves better, and then someone else comes along and changes what already is a corrupted story to begin with. So as a researcher, I have to go back to the original text, which is the Sumerian text. And if you read what's in there, the stories are already 5,000 years old by the time the Sumerians are writing about it. And the underlying language of Sumerian is Armenian. So now you have to go back to Armenia to find out where all this stuff came from. And there's a lot of information that's missing. So that's my job at the moment, to try and piece that story together.
Yeah, do you think we can trust the original text of the Atrahasis and the Anunnaki? Like, I know other people think those are pretty important. What do you think about those original writings? I'm not talking about like the Zachariah Sitchin stuff. I'm talking about like maybe earlier translations from like people like George Smith.
Brilliant, because the problem with Sumerian and other dead languages is that there are subtleties in the language. It's a bit like in English, you have affluent and effluent. They're close, but they mean completely different things. So if you just misread the accent on a Sumerian word a little bit differently, you get a completely different meaning. And I was going back to the books of Christian O'Brien, who wrote 2 fantastic books, which are really hard to find in England, about the Shining Ones, the Anunnaki, and the original stories of the Garden of Eden. And he made a very, very good point. He passed away about 20 years ago. And I've got these 2 enormous books, which are bloody expensive in my library. But he makes a very good point that you have to actually read the context of the translation. Most of it was done during the Victorian era, which had a very Catholic slant to it. So you have to take away the Catholic slant and put the story and the words in context of what was happening. And he actually makes a much better translation. It's not far off from what we have, but it makes a lot more sense because it's practical, it's understandable, and it's logical.
Where does it differ, do you think? Like,
for example, the one of my favorites is the serpent in the Garden of Eden. So complete nonsense, because by the time the Hebrews distorted the story, they had no idea about the people of the serpent. They literally thought that the devil was evil. Well, Lucifer was the light bearer. He was the person who creates obstacles. Satan in Arabic language actually means someone who provides an obstacle. And the obstacle is to force us to be confronted with a situation that allows you, given your God-given brain, to overcome the situation, you see, and it makes you a better person. So Satan is actually a very useful person. Even in daily life, we get, Satan's at the bank, we get Satan's in the police, we get Satan's everywhere to challenge us or to confront our perception so that we can alter our perception of what's really happening so we can choose a better course forward. And the same thing with the Garden of Eden with the serpent. I mean, the fact that you have a serpent speaking to a human being, that should rouse your suspicion right up there. I mean, snakes don't talk, for a period. Even as a metaphor, it doesn't make sense. So if you go back to the original story in Sumeria, it becomes much easier to understand. Ninlil, who was basically the wife of Enki, who was the very supportive god of humans from the Anunnaki, they were basically trying to create this garden or an enclosure, which is much more accurate, in a place called Eden, which means a cultivatable plain. So it could have been somewhere north in Mesopotamia, as far as we know. They were trying to build this horticultural center to grow vegetables and grow enough crop and food to feed the growing population of the Watchers and the Anunnaki. They had their own compound. And when they had the humans in there, they said, look, if you actually eat of this tree, there's something that happens to you where you suddenly become much more understanding of the mysteries of life. That's why it's called the tree of knife or the tree of knowledge. It's almost like it's kind of a drug. It looks like a pine cone sometimes. I think it's a part of the pomegranate family, as far as I've been able to figure out. And it is a kind of a hallucinogenic drug. So kind of like we do ayahuasca today, that's essentially what it does. It liberates your brain and it allows you to astral travel to understand the world better. So her nickname, Tabayet, her nickname was a serpent person. So that was their nickname of the gods in the ancient cultures. If you understood the laws of nature, which basically are electricity and magnetism, which flow like two serpents along the landscape that you don't see, but you can sense, basically you become a person of the serpent. That's what the actual title means. And you see it all around the world. So it's had nothing to do with snakes. It has nothing to do with reptiles or evil people. It's just your title of the people to whom you happen to belong. So you see how over two different cultures, the story of this interesting person that's trying to teach humans how to be better people suddenly becomes corrupted into something completely evil.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and this ties into like your new documentary Megalith, and so I'm going to get into next. Like, why do you think these beings were making these megaliths? Do we have any reason? Do we have any clues to what their goals were, or anything like that?
I'm beginning to figure it out, and I think I'm halfway there. This is after 25 years of research. You've got to be patient with this stuff because you're going to rely on geography, you have to rely on geology, science, also electrical engineers, believe it or not, climate. You have to bring all of these things together to get a bigger picture. And the picture that's beginning to come together is that the reason why there are big clusters of megaliths is because they were choosing areas that are very high in piezoelectric activity. So the geology of the land, like let's say Karnak, for example, which is the west coast of Brittany, biggest concentration of megaliths. At the end of the last century, it was calculated there was as many as 50 monuments per square mile. It's like a forest of stone. It was incredible. It still is today, despite the fact that 80,000 of them have been removed, and there's still enough left to make you go, wow. Well, they happen to occupy a high area of granite, which is highly piezoelectric. It's full of quartz. And underneath that, you've got massive deposits of iron. So the whole thing is very electromagnetically active. It's also suspiciously attracted to lightning, which is why there's so many folklore saying do not go into the dolmens when there's a storm because you might get hit by lightning. And sure enough, you do. I was in Portugal last year filming for the documentary, and the tree next to one of my favorite dolmens, which I was filmed beautifully, came back 3 months later, boom, completely gone, wiped out by lightning. So that's one. Two, they also are referencing, this is the one that blows my mind, they're referencing fault lines. So you've got these stones, which are between 19 and 63 feet tall, and you put them on some of the most seismically active areas on the planet, and yet they don't fall down. It's like they're designed so well that the center of the gravity of the stone enables them to stay upright unless someone goes up there and literally gives it a good whack and pulls it down. So the stones are in a state of constant vibration, not enough for you to see it, but the vibration is enough to create an electrical current because they're attached to the bedrock, you see. So it goes from one piezoelectric material to another. And those stones were carried as many as 40 miles away because of the content of gneiss, of mica, of feldspar, quartz, iron. And when you put all of those together in a large amount of rocks, you start creating a kind of a collective energetic environment. We also have the fact that they are also referencing gravity anomalies. Now, how our ancestors were able to figure out that when they're walking through a specific piece of land, there's a deficient gravity area in that specific region. That is amazing. It shows that they were so connected to the land, they could sense the stuff. And now I'm talking about the fact that gravity is so different that your car takes off and goes flying. I'm talking about the fact that there's a slight change in the gravitational field, which allows you to interact with the human body and have an altered state of consciousness, which is why the folklore associates itself with altered states, with healings, and also with fertility, not just of the body, but also of plants that grow near the megaliths. The plants are growing better than anywhere further away from the actual megaliths. So we now have an understanding that they were doing this, A, for attracting energy, 2, manipulating the energy field, 3, altering the field of consciousness of any individual that goes anywhere near these things, 4, to achieve a fertilizing effect on the land, the animals, and the people. So that's just as far as we've got so far. I'm sure there's other things that are also available that still haven't come out of the woodwork. But the part of the mechanism here is actually in the names of the sites itself. So Karnak, for example, that's not a local name. It's an Armenian phrase, and it means the enclosure of stones of light. So now you got to ask yourself, what light are we dealing with here? Are we dealing with enlightenment? Were they creating light out of the actual environment, like a kind of a Tesla device that enables you to illuminate the landscape? That's where we're at with the research right now, to take this a stage further from the practical.
Yeah, and you connect these sites with altered states of consciousness. What might someone have experienced inside or around like a functioning megalithic complex? And like also, what about the stone circles? Because I know that Africa has the stone circles, and then Britain also has the stone circles. Do they tie into this as well? Because it seems like people get like energetic shifts when they're around those as well.
Oh, absolutely. And the folklore talks about very, very tall people moving the stones. In fact, giants seems to be everywhere in the folklore of megaliths, not just fairies and elves, which is a whole other story. But yeah, originally, like Stonehenge, for example, the original builders are claimed to have been giants that came from Africa. Now, we know the stones came from Wales and Scotland, and also in the local area of Wiltshire. What the technology was and who brought it may have actually come from Africa, because there is a precursor to Stonehenge in Morocco to this very day. Most of it's still there, incredibly enough. But they also had stories of the Gibberim, which are the giant people that move the stones. So it's not just a European thing. It's also an African observation. And the fact that the spirits of the giant people or the fairy folk still live at these sites. Now, what was done when Karnak was being investigated was that the design and the shape of the megaliths also adjust the way that the energy behaves. So the dolmens, which are essentially the interior of eroded hills, by the way, all the soil cover is now gone. And you look at these things and they're beautiful. And you think, why would you cover that with soil? Because it's beautiful to look at. And it's such an incredible effort to go to balance those 7 stones with the 8th, which is the capstone. But then you cover it in soil. Well, it turns out that the soil is built of organic layers and inorganic layers. And what it does, it acts as a filter. Anybody who's into Wilhelm Reich would understand what I'm saying. It's called the accumulation of orgone energy. So when you actually take an electric meter in the dolmens, the frequency is much different from what it is on the outside. And the frequency is there to lower your brainwave patterns, to stop you thinking and to get you to feel much more. So basically, the design of the dolmen acts like a great big concentrator, and it allows you to put yourself in a state of grace. And then at certain times of the day, like in the morning, the energy is much more intense. And if you open yourself up to the possibility, or just go in as a skeptic, as someone who hasn't made up their mind, which is the way to be, and see what happens to you in the morning. See if you get a sense that there's something else around you. And the more you do it, I mean, I got to the point now where I can see people coming in and out of the dolmens, because I've been doing it for so long that I've become very sensitive to the actual energy of these things. So I can sense the energy moving in, moving out, the memory of people in there. So when I go in, and I usually do this as an exercise to come up with a new idea for a book, for example, I just go in and say, well, what's this all about? I don't really know enough about this, but how can I tell the story? And I just sit there in a kind of a dream state and start writing notes. And I thought, well, if this is true about these sites, it'll be fantastic as a story. And I go and research it for about 4 or 5 years. And sure enough, the information is there. So it's like the stones are telling you something. They're alive. And even a simple standing stone behaves very the same way. They behave like a big accumulator, like a needle. And I remember Pierre Méreau, who was the lead scientist in Karnak, saying He's also an electrical engineer. He said, well, I probed the stones and I found that they seem to suck in the energy from the surrounding landscape. They suck in the serpent energy, and then it accumulates for about 70 minutes, and then it discharges, and it discharges like ripples in a pond. I'm a dowser also by trade, so I was able to actually figure out, before I read Moreau's report, that each of these stones also has a ripple effect. And it's not just like someone throwing a stone in the pond and you see the big ripples, and the ripples get slower and slower as you get to within, say, 40 feet of the actual standing stone. The gap between the actual ripples is conformed by an invisible geometric array, and that's the language of nature. So it's not just haphazard geometry, it's structured energy as well. And if you happen to touch the stone before it's been discharged, you will, I guarantee you, get an electric shock. There's many people that this has happened to. You won't feel your forearm for about 10 minutes. It's quite potent. And the stone circles, he said, well, they attract the energy from the landscape and they basically concentrate it like a big circle, which of course is what they do. And one of the biggest experiments was done at Avebury, the world's biggest stone circle. And what was found was that the stone avenue leading into the actual stone circle, the stones have been positioned so that the magnetic pole of the stone has a positive charge on the inside, and it matches a negative charge on the stone on the other side, and then it alternates. So you're going down this sort of movement of energy from left to right as you're approaching the stone circle. And a scientist from Switzerland will say, well, that's how we build CERN, the world's biggest particle collider, using magnetic poles in opposite polarities to move atoms in this enormous circular thing. So the ancients figured it out before we did. And what happens around Avebury is that before dawn, all the readings literally disappear inside the stone circle, but the energy of the land is attracted to the ditch around the actual stone circle. It starts moving around like a particle collider. And the moment the sun crosses the horizon, all the readings around Avebury, and I got to say there are hundreds of electric probes put into the ground to actually measure this. They found that suddenly there's an opening happens between the two big portal stones at Avebury, and all the energy that's been accumulating in that ditch doubles in frequency, and it goes into the center of the stone circle, and the stone circle is almost waking up from slumber. And it happens every single morning. So by the time you get to the late evening, you feel like the stone circle, there's not much energy there. Because it's like a person. It's accumulated, it's spent all its energy, and it's now going to sleep. And that's something that the Egyptians said about the temples too. In the morning, you've got to wake the temple up like a sleeping person. So we now know that the stones aren't just stones. They're actually living organisms. They're alive, and they concentrate, move, store energy relative to their design.
So do you think these were strategically placed around the planet to like regulate the energy of the planet and produce more like harmonizing energy?
Who knows? This is now a hypothesis. It seems to be more than a conjecture that they weren't just doing this to create altered states of consciousness or improve crop yields. It seems to be a lot of work to do that. It seems as though there's another thing here that we haven't yet processed, and it may have been to do with something that Tesla originally suggested, that in the ancient times, they used stone structures in a certain geometric and positioned way to tap the natural energy of the land in order to send the energy from A to B. And I'm beginning to suspect that that's exactly what they were doing. Can't prove it yet, so it's still in the hypothesis stage, and we're slowly moving in that direction. But it seems to me that all these antennas all around the planet appear to be part of one whole concept, which brings us to the point of I'm sure the Atlantis word will come into the story at some point. And I was actually asking myself the same question when I was going around France filming along the coastline. It occurred to me that the older sites are along the coast, and they get younger as they go into the actual woods. And back then, Central Europe was really hard to get through at the end of the Ice Age because it was full of impediments, and also it was mostly forested. So it appears that it was a seafaring culture, which means that the actual stones are running away from the ocean, because today with sonar we can actually see many stone circles and stone avenues around the Brittany coast underwater. So simple calculation is that the water level began to rise around 6,000 BC, which means all the stuff that we see today has a precursor that's older than 6,000 BC under the ocean. And I came across one archaeological report between between Sicily and Tunisia in the Mediterranean Channel, which was found at a depth of 120 meters. And it's a stone, one simple stone. It's exactly the same height as many of the tall stones in Brittany, and it's the same shape. And the only way it could have been put there was by people who existed during the Ice Age, because that stone would have had to have been on dry land before 8,000 BC, because the Mediterranean began to rise only 1,000 years earlier than that. So we are dealing with another culture, not just the one from the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea that moves there around 6,000 BC and built another group of monuments. We're dealing with an even earlier culture that started the whole thing rolling. And the only people I can think of, again, is the Anunnaki, because they were also over in the middle of the Atlantic. They used to call them the Ophusa there. It means the people of the serpent. So it's the same group of people going by a different name. And they have the same story in Yucatan. The Maya call them the Canul, which means in their language, people of the serpent. And they came from a sunken island in the middle of the Atlantic during a global flood.
Wow. So, but like, it seems like evidence connects the megalith builders to like Armenia and the Black Sea. Do you think that's originally where they started out, or were they, it seems like maybe they were from off world or some other dimension. I don't know what, maybe are more advanced humans, but did they start off in the Armenia or Black Sea region?
We don't know. That's a story that we get in the West because, Europeans are the ones that are picking up the story. Whereas when I travel to the Pacific, the stories get wildly more older as we get further into deep water. And the Pacific actually lost more coastline during the end of the Ice Age than any part of the planet. And I've always said this as a hypothesis, that much of what we know today from our understanding of ancient cultures and archaeology really comes from a European point of view, which puts the Middle East as the importance in this and the beginning of everything, because of the influence of Catholicism and the Bible, the Garden of Eden, the whole traditions of Jewish tradition. It's very centralized around there. But when I go to South America and the Pacific, it's a completely different story. I get even older stories from the Aboriginal people about people who lived on islands, island nations in the middle of the Pacific, which have now long gone. Even Easter Island used to be an archipelago. When I speak to the grandmothers of a tribe that lived there during the Ice Age, and they were called the Waitaha, and they talk about the gods, the Urukeu, with whom they interacted with on a regular level. And they used to go from South America, from Tiwanaku, where they had their temple, which is one of the oldest sites on Earth. It's 15,000 BC, Tiwanaku. And they used to go to Easter Island as a stop on the way to a place called the Birthplace of the Gods, which is in the South Island of New Zealand. And it's still there, by the way. I recommend you go to this place because it's mind-blowing. So that's just that story. The Aborigines have another story about this, and also the Hopi and the Zuni have their own stories about the islands that they came from in the middle of the Pacific called Kashkara. And we don't know where it is, somewhere between Hawaii and Baja California, could be anywhere. But they said, no, we were helped by these people. And they were the ones that brought us to Arizona, where we are today. And the main leader that helped them get to Arizona is the original name of Mount Ararat in Armenia. So how the hell do these things come together? So I don't know. All I know is that when I was writing The Missing Lands, the book, I actually focused on this story because I wanted to find out who were the gods, who were these people. And the best I've been able to figure out, listening to every ancient culture on the planet, was that they lived on 8 islands, or places that behaved like islands, including Tiwanaku, which itself was an island city back when Lake Titicaca used to surround it. There's another one in the Armenian highlands, which I think I've finally found the 8th island of the gods, but I got to go there and I have to prove it. There's been a bit of a war down there, so with Azerbaijan, so things have been a little bit sort of dodgy. I don't want to be working in a war zone, but the other islands have pretty much vanished. We have the Atlantis story in the middle of the Atlantic. We have an island off the coast of Saudi Arabia called Tepitaka, which means the free baskets of knowledge, which is the free baskets that you see carved on the pillar of Göbekli Tepe. So it's the same people. And there's stories from the Cook Islands, from the elders, that said that's where the Tupanaki, as they call them, not the Anunnaki, the Tupanaki, that's where they lived. They had an island off the coast of Saudi Arabia, and it sank during the Great Flood. So this is about as far as I could figure out. There was a kind of a brother and sisterhood of gods all around the planet that lived on 8 different locations. And whenever they were forced to, or they had to, they would communicate with humans. So that's about as far as I got with that project. And it's still an ongoing thing, because I'm looking into the rubbish bag of history here, my friend.
This is fascinating. By the way, my friend Rock Castaldo, who comes on my show all the time, he studied a lot of history too. He'd like to have you on his show. I'll introduce you to him. He's actually going to speak at a Megalith conference in New York this weekend. So I'll introduce you guys. But he wanted me to ask you. I'll put it up on the screen. Yeah, he says. Did you know about the dragon stones with the markings of water birds on them, like the heron?
I know about the dragon stones in Armenia.
Yeah. What is that? Like, what is it like a megalith?
Yes, they're enormous stones, and I think they're about 13 feet. The minimal height, and they're marking the actual correlation point between telluric currents, which is what we call the serpent lines, not ley lines. That's something very different. But it's the telluric currents that flow through the Earth where they form an X. Unfortunately, Harrison Ford was wrong when he said X never marked the spot. Actually, X does mark the spot, because whenever those X's interact on the landscape, they create a kind of a vortex of energy. And the water that seems to congregate under these spots is charged, because there's water, and there's holy water. And the Vishtabs, which is what they call the dragon stones in Armenia, they basically were a symbol of fecundity. Some of them are shaped like dragons, most of them are shaped like fish. And I think that came later with humans sort of chiseling away. So we didn't forget the reason why they were there, because the original stones have no markings whatsoever. Not familiar one with the heron on it, though, but I am familiar with the ones that are marked like fish and they're shaped like dragons. And they call them dragon stones.
And what I think is really cool is that you got to travel kind of all over the world and get the stories from the local people and people from villages, right? About like all the different stuff. Like they know that, it seems like they know about the different more of the ancient people and the megaliths. Like that had to be fascinating. Did you go all over the world, or where all did you go to? Like,
yeah, because I like to. It's a wonderful American accounting system that allows me to write off my expenses, which is why I like living here. It dawned on me, coming from a European point of view, that we are the last culture on the planet. Europe has always presented itself as the height of civilization. Well, that depends on your point of view. I would say that most Aboriginal people that live in the desert, who can live in the desert just by watching the clouds or by the way that bushes grow, they will be able to survive in a climate where most Europeans would die in seconds. And I would posit that we are the last group of people on the planet. It's like we're going west, but we're getting further away from the point of origin, which I do believe at one point was the Pacific. And so my point was to go and talk to these people and hear it from their point of view, because their ancestors were there. They were closer to the events than we will ever be in our lifetime. I mean, there are people in Egypt whose great-great-great-great-great-grandparents were closer to the building of the pyramids than we are today. So why not ask them what they thought? What was their point of view? Because these stories are transmitted orally from generation to generation, and they took great pride in getting the facts right. The Druids, for example, to learn all this information, they would spend 10 years memorizing the history of their culture and their previous cultures in order to commit this so that the next generation knows how to get things right. So the more I hear, the more I start piecing things together. And a lot of them have never had any personal interaction, but this is where learning dead languages comes in really useful. I'm very glad to have some great assistants when I go everywhere, because they have their context. And I said, look, we're in South America, we're up in the Andes in Lake Titicaca. Who can I talk to about the flood in Viracocha? I said, oh, you need to talk to the Aymara and the Pukina, and there's only 3,000 of them left. So, I'm very graceful. I said, look, I'm just trying to understand from a European point of view how to get the story right from your perspective, from people who were there long ago, because you're bound to be closer to the truth than we are. And of course, it brings down the wall immediately. I'm not trying to rip them off. I'm trying to use their words to support a foundation. And once I get into the language and learning about the subtlety of language, and they'll telling me the story, and I'll say, wait a minute, what you've just described about the monument builders in Lake Titicaca is how they would describe the followers of Horus in Egypt. So how do they call Virakosha? And he said, well, he was here with 7 helpers. He was the charismatic leader. And I said, do you realize that story happens all around the world? That these gods appear on these Pacific coastlines around the planet at the end of the Ice Age. They give us the information about how to restart civilization. And they're always in groups of 7 with one woman who carries the bloodline, the genetic bloodline. And the 8th is the charismatic leader. And they went, wow, we didn't know that. And so what do you call the people who were helping Virakosha? And they said, well, they were the Haihaiwapanti. What does that mean? They said, oh, that means the shining ones. And I said, well, do you realize that that's what they call the followers of Horus and the Anunnaki? And then they opened up and they went, well, that doesn't surprise us because the Egyptians were coming here a long time ago. They were great seafarers. And if you start looking at the language threshold between South America and Egypt, there's a lot of overlaps, just like in the Maya world. There's a lot of overlap between the Egyptian language and Maya language as well. For example, Maya is when you go to Egypt, you ask for a bottle of water and you say Maya. That means water. And the Maya means water people. So there's a lot of interaction around the world between ancient cultures that European academics have never credited anyone with, because they claim that back then people were stupid, they weren't getting around very much, they were wearing loincloths, not doing anything important until we get to Sumeria or Greece, and then Europe takes off. Well, that's a Eurocentric point of view. But if you go to the other side of the world, it's a much more beautiful story, and it all overlaps beautifully. Even with the Hopi stories of North America, all their stories begin to line up and merge beautifully. So what I found by talking to the local cultures, I'm filling in the holes that we have in archaeology and academia, which no one wants to talk about because they're not giving the ancient people any credit.
This is so fast. I love this. This is so interesting. It seems
it's
like
very addictive.
it is. What I was going to say was, so do you think we need to throw out the whole narrative of history? I wanted to ask you, that Columbus came here. Do you think there were already people in America? And then also to back that, what do you think about the idea of Pangea, that all the continents were once connected? I don't know if you ever get into that.
Impossible. That's impossible to work out. It's a pure conjecture. We can't go back trillions of years and figure that out. We had the geology to back it up, that perhaps all the continents were together at one point. But then you've got to factor in erosion as well. That's a big concept in terms of understanding how things fit. They may fit from the point of view today, but 100, 200 million years ago, a billion years ago, things look very, very different. And the earth sometimes has been upside down as well, which any ancient culture talks about. There's a periodic renewal of the planet where objects from the sky come crashing down, and if they crash down at the wrong place at the wrong time, the earth actually revolves in the opposite direction, and sometimes the poles actually move, physically move. And you hear this in Egypt, you hear this in South America, North America, and so forth. So it's very hard to figure that out.
The other question I had was about Columbus. Do you think we throw out that narrative that Columbus, or do you think there might have already been people here in North America?
Everybody was here, Rob. Everybody was here. The Portuguese were here before Columbus. I found a map in Harvard Library that shows the Portuguese and Templar flag in Labrador, which is now Labrador, which means labor in Portuguese, by the way. And there's all these diagrams of drying salt cod, which is the favorite dish of Portugal. And that was long before Columbus, who didn't even get to America, by the way. He went to the fishermen in Lisbon, finding out, how do you get to the big continent over there? And of course, we've been going there I was born in Portugal. We've been going there for hundreds of years. It was a major fishing trading route for the Portuguese, and we kept it quiet. We worked with the nobles of Scotland and also the Genoese pilots, who were incredible navigators. So we gave him vague directions, and he still, after 3 tries, still didn't land in America, by the way. We thought he was a bit of an idiot in Lisbon, and there's a certain sort of support for him as a nice, meaning but completely idiotic sailor as part of the folklore. No, I mean, the Cherokee have been here for at least, 15,000 years, and they claimed that, and it's just been proved. They found artifacts and DNA and carbon-14 dating of their sites in the Appalachia, which shows that they were here during the Ice Age, and even before that, the last Ice Age, in the previous Ice Age. There were stories by the Zuni and the Hopi that they were also moving here by 9000 BC, and they can prove it. There is also a tribe in the coast of Vancouver, and I don't remember what the name is, I'm very sorry, and they said that, we're tired of people trying to tell us about our own history. We lived here during the Ice Age. There was a warm water that came from the Pacific, and we lived along the coast. Which makes a lot of sense. Well, it took a couple of archaeologists who were a bit more open-minded to go to these spots that they're being told to look at. They dug up the coast and they found that all the habitations, the totem poles, and the existence of habitation of this tribe in the middle of the Ice Age. So this has the whole story of race in the last 20 years has to be completely erased and restarted again because of the new information that we're getting. So it was a very populous place. Even Oklahoma, there are sites just outside of Tulsa that show that there was a mosaic floor covered by what used to be the ocean at that point, which is now the Gulf of Mexico. I'll repeat that, the Gulf of Mexico, which is now covered by layers of debris and limestone. And they found this beautiful mosaic floor still intact when they're putting the foundation for a Walmart. And they found all these holes perfectly drilled at specific units from each other, which happens to be the same unit of measure called the megalithic yard that was used to create the stone circles of Europe. And that's just the tip of the iceberg in Oklahoma, by the way. There's a lot more going on down there.
Wow. Yeah. I even interviewed this guy. His name's Sandy Nichols. Like he was on Coast to Coast AM, and what's interesting about him is he lives in Tennessee. But where he lived in Tennessee, in his backyard, he dug up like an Aztec burial ground or something like that. It's like he has come people there to his house and look at it. I thought it was fascinating. Or it's something ancient. It's definitely not manipulated or anything like that. And then what's interesting about his house is I don't know what made me think of this is his house is really paranormal. Like he buried a huge geode under the welcome mat in front of his door, and he gets all kinds of weird anomalies happening and stuff like that. And I think it's maybe tied to what's in his backyard or whatever he found there. Do you think
the management has got their phone number? They got his phone number. Ask a Cherokee. I mean, I love having conversations with a Cherokee whenever I can. Oh, it's fantastic. They'll tell you who built Serpent Mound, and the fact that they showed up. It was already a culture in decline, and they just kept up the grounds, the landscaping to make sure it wouldn't erode. So they said, no, we didn't build it. It was already here when we came over, and that was around the end of the Ice Age. You just talked to them about the mound builders and where they came from. Some of them came up from Central America, some were here, and they went down to Central America. There's all this movement of people across the continent, and of course, we're getting the story in school that this is the new world, and the Europeans came here. Yeah, but when they arrived, they thought that they were the high point of civilization. So when the Cortez and company and all the other bloodthirsty bastards show up in the middle of Mexico and find this incredible temple city in the middle of a lake, which looks like Venice on steroids, they were absolutely blown away. In fact, most of the priests that were with the Spanish, they put down their swords and their cross and they said, "We've been lied to about history. This, there's an even older culture here, even older and more grander than what we see in Europe. So why don't we study it before we start killing it?" So I do believe, and now with the latest studies in the Amazon, which is bring the fact that there's a whole civilization in the middle of the Amazon, we're having to completely rethink the whole structure of history and the fact that history began probably somewhere else. And again, for my money, for my $1 worth, I would say it's all in the Pacific and it's now under the ocean.
Well, do you think it was like a concerted effort to cover up history, or do you think it's a miscommunication or do you think it's like history's written by the victors, so we're getting a picture of what they want us to hear? Do you think it's kind of all the above?
All the above. If you go back to the origin of archaeology in Britain in the Victorian era, the point of archaeology is to validate the fact that the Earth was created in 4,400 BC on a Tuesday sometime in August. Which is preposterous. You have to create the universe, create the earth, create dinosaurs, wipe them out, and then get Adam and Eve on board in less than 4,000 years. It's ridiculous. And if you see the origins of archaeology and how they progress into the early 20th century, they were still trying to validate that and trying to fit in the new world into that, and the Americas and how that fits in, and the contortions that they had to go through in order to fit it into the biblical narrative. They've only just come out of that in the last 80 years. So got to give them a little credit. They are trying, but we're still holding on to the fact that everyone that came before us in the 21st century was a barbarian. And yet you look at places like Stonehenge or the big stone circle up in Orkney called Brogar. They married the heavens and the solar and the lunar cycles with perfect precision. These calendars are never going to go out of date. So how are they able to do this? We have the Maya, who have something like 30 different calendars. Some of them track time crossing something like 15,000 years. What would you care about that length of time if you're a farmer? That all you want to do is something that tells you where the sun and the moon are going to be, so you can sow, you can reap the crops and start the process all over again. And then if the tree trunks that you've used on the ground to align these solar objects, well, if they fall down, you just get new tree trunks and you put them back up again. You don't need to use enormous pyramids or massive stone circles to tell you what's happening in the sky. So I do think that the people that were here before, to quote the Sumerians, the difference between us and gods was that a god was someone who understood the laws of nature and had to bend those rules within the confines of the rules. You can't go outside the rules. The rules are there for a reason. But they were able to tuning into magnetic energy. They could move the magnetic lines. They could move electrical current. They could change the weather. Ask anybody in Brazil, in the jungle, or the Hopi and the Navajo. They say, yeah, we're going to go out and make some rain now. Pure power of intention, which is itself an electromagnetic signal that you send out into nature, and nature, if you know what you're doing, will respond relative to the laws of nature. So that's what makes you a god. So we've also confused gods with being otherworldly beings or aliens or invisible people. They might be, but our ancestors realized that the gods were very practical, normal people like us. They were just much taller and, 8.5 feet tall, and they looked very unusual. And like we said at the beginning, the skin was so light that they had to put some sort of sunscreen on it, which gave it this shining appearance. But that wasn't the only part of the metaphor. It was the fact that when you are a learned person, which differentiates you from a hunter-gatherer, it gives you a certain glow. That's what the metaphor is. It's like...
enlightened.
Yeah, enlightened. So when you have holy people depicted in pictures, you see this halo around them. Yeah, that's a glow. That's a shining person. You have a glow about you. There's a shine about you. So there were two things that represented this particular metaphor.
That's fascinating. Wow. Well, I was going to say, we've been going about an hour. Is there anything else you want to cover about the documentary? Or, and if not, well, you could tell people where they could say it. And this was awesome, Freddie. Thank you so much for doing this. This was really cool.
No, it's a labor of love. It's taken me 5 years to put this together and portray the Megaliths in a way that haven't been done before. The thing is, I shot it originally in black and white. It's actually a very melancholic story at the end of it. But if the black and white film, I've always wanted to do a kind of a film noir of megaliths. It strips out all the distraction, and you see the stones for the geometry and the shapes, and you begin to realize the shapes mean something. They are recurring shapes all around the world. That's the next project. What are the shapes meaning? There is, for example, the same shape which looks like a boomerang stone, which is in Orkney, it's in Ireland, it's in Brittany, it's in Portugal, it's in Armenia. So now I have to go back to all the places I've been to and measure what these stones are trying to tell me. They seem to be part of a language here. So, or maybe someone else that's watching this wants to take it onto themselves. Please share the information. It's a massive project. But the black and white documentary makes a lot more sense. The problem is that when I sold the rights to Gaia Television, they only bought the color version, which looks beautiful, by the way, but it's not quite as real. So it's you'll see both versions only on my Vimeo channel, which is on my website. So and also I get paid more.
And is that at invisibletemple.com or freddysilva.com or both?
Invisibletemple.com.
Okay. Yeah, this was awesome. Yeah, I really enjoyed this. This literally some of the stuff you told me blew me away. I really did. So thank you. I mean, yeah,
I like blowing away people.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, everybody, and thank you, Freddy. And guys, go check out Freddy's website, freddysilva.com or invisibletemple.com. And thank you so much. Have a nice day, guys. And